Intelligent Talk with Ralph McElvenney. Join us every Thursday at 5 p.m. on the City World Radio Network as we discuss topics in politics, art, and current events.
All right, welcome to Intelligent Talk. Our website is intelligenttalk.com. Our next guest is of interest to anyone who would like to live longer than we do now. Dr. Aubrey DeGray is a leading proponent that we don't have to die at the current suggested time that we do, but we have the ability to extend life. Dr. DeGray is a graduate of Harrow School in London, and he has a PhD from Cambridge. He's the Chief Science Officer of SENS Research Foundation and the Vice President of New Technology of Ajax Discovery. Dr. DeGray, thank you so much for coming on the program today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So if I could, just to talk about SENS, that basically is a foundation that you have that involves the rejuvenation of the body, right? That's what it stands for?
Yes, pretty much, yes. The name is an acronym for something terribly long that we never talk about really. But yes, ultimately it's all about rejuvenation, which means repairing the damage that the body does to itself throughout life that eventually makes us sick late in life. Right.
And may I ask you how you got interested in this field and how you basically became such a proponent of, really you were the pioneer in this effort to say we didn't have to have that death trance, as you say, and extend life beyond our current guidelines?
I got involved maybe 25 or so years ago when I discovered that hardly any biologists really appreciated that aging is a serious problem, and an important and interesting one, which is, pretty crazy. But I thought that everybody agreed with me on this, and I had never really done the experiment of actually asking people. But when I discovered this, I thought, well, okay, I really ought to work on it. At that time, I was already working quite successfully in another area of research, in artificial intelligence. But I happened to be in a very fortunate position where I was able to switch fields, so that's what I did. In terms of being a pioneer in this area, where I always like to point out that maybe I'm the most prominent person these days, but there were plenty of people before me who did that bit. And of course, it was harder back then because we didn't have really such a good idea about how to go about defeating aging. So, I've definitely built on my predecessors in this regard.
Okay, and just so people, your website is sens.org, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, and just a brief about your background. Your mother had, I think, 2 properties in the Chelsea area of London, which is an area that I love in London, and I believe you sold those and you donated something like $11 million to your foundation. Is that correct?
That's something like right, yes. I think the total price that the houses sold for was $16.5 million, and I donated $13 million. Right,
so you certainly put your money where your mouth is in terms of believing this project. And just to, I'm sorry?
Yeah, for me it was a no-brainer. I dedicated my life to this, and I only had one real, reason why I needed money, which is I wanted to buy a nice house, which I have done. I'm living in a really fantastic place in the mountains south of San Francisco. Other than that, it was obvious to me that the best use for the money in my own terms was to spend it on the research.
Okay, so I'm just going to try to explain in a simple term basically what you believe. You're also the author of the 2007 book, Ending Aging. You believe that the body is sort of like a car. And like as you said, Henry Ford made a lot of money because cars wear out, and Henry Ford would just simply sell you a new car. But you believe the body, we can replace it, and we can make a car last longer, just like a body, than it would normally be. That's sort of an example you give, correct?
That is correct, yes. And of course, the thing is, we can already do this. There are some cars out there that were built more than 100 years ago, and they're working every bit as well as when they were built. And that's not because they were unusually designed to last 100 years, whereas most cars are designed to last 10 years. These 100-year-old cars were also designed to last only 10 years. It's just that their owners did an unusually comprehensive amount of preventative maintenance on them throughout their existence. So this tells us very clearly that the same thing is feasible, it's potentially feasible for this much more complicated machine called the human body. The only thing is that because it's more complicated, we don't yet know how to do that comprehensive preventative maintenance.
I have a 1923 Model T in Maine, so I could certainly relate to your example, Dr. DeGray. And I've kept that. We've had that running now for almost 100 years, so it goes in what you were saying. I've seen your.
Fantastic.
Thank you. I've seen your lectures. I went to your website. I went to your YouTube videos. I'm familiar with your books. So I've tried to sort of summarize. There are 7 types of things with cells that you think needs to be corrected, as I understand it. And it's sort of complicated, but it's like, I believe with stem cells, we're the most advanced, you're saying. And then it's like restore tissue supplements, get the junk outside of cells, a whole series. Could you just, in very simple terms, explain what needs to be done and what has been done with the science, Doctor?
You're absolutely right. There are 7 major types of damage that we need to address, that we need to repair. And the rate of progress on developing those repair technologies has certainly been very non-uniform. Some of them have moved a lot further than others. The one that has been in the lead is to repair a type of damage that I simply call cell loss, the cells declining in number. That happens, of course, when cells die and they are not automatically replaced by the division of other cells. So, of course, the fix for that is stem cell therapy, to put cells into the body that we have prepared in the laboratory into a state where they will divide and differentiate to replace the cells that the body is not replacing on its own. And we at Sense Research Foundation have done very little stem cell therapy over the years, stem cell research, simply because all of the really important stuff is already in progress, being done by other people. So that's all been very wonderful. We've been able to focus on the things that are more neglected. However, over the years, we have made progress on those areas, and now a number of other things are moving along very nicely. The one that's, I think, definitely the runner-up right now, the one that's in the number 2 position, is to eliminate senescent cells, or we often call them death-resistant cells, cells that get into a bad state where they're doing more harm than good, but for whatever reason the body is unable to get rid of them. And, of course, the senescent cells have been very much in the news over the past couple of years as a result of the progress that's been made in developing drugs that can selectively kill such cells. The leading company in that area, Unity Biotechnology, has raised, more than $300 million to pursue this, and there are many other companies, including ones that we are closely associated with, that are also doing that same thing. In other areas, there's still, a long way to go, but a number of them have also been spun out into companies that are startups that have not done quite so well at Unity yet, but they're definitely following that same trajectory. So, we're pretty happy about the way things are moving.
So your focus at SENS is to work on things that are not being pursued by other people to sort of fill in the gaps. Is that right?
That's exactly right, yes. Our priority has always been to do things that are not being done by other people. And the reason for that, very simple, the fact that any preventative maintenance approach of the sort that we are pursuing is necessarily a divide and conquer approach, an approach in which you can't leave anything out. You've got to fix all the types of damage, because any one of them can make the machine function less well and eventually not at all, irrespective of how well you fix all the other types of damage. Of course, there's a certain amount of crosstalk between types of damage. In other words, if you fix one, then you may generally, put the body into a somewhat better state so that the other types of damage will accumulate slightly more slowly than they previously were. And historically, my view has always been that crosstalk was probably not going to be very substantial, that, you wouldn't actually delay the other things very much as a result of fixing any one type of damage. However, now, I think it's fair to say that, at least in the case of senescent cells, that crosstalk may be much more substantial than I was previously anticipating. And that's, of course, fantastically good news. It means that we would expect to actually have substantial benefits and allow ourselves to, to get therapies that were truly comprehensive, that really, postponed the ill health of old age a lot, even with a relatively incomplete, relatively imperfect panel of repair interventions.
Right, you've said in your videos that basically, obviously, if you live long enough, you're definitely going to die of one of these things. One of the things you mentioned is the plaque associated with Alzheimer's. And are you working on methods to reduce the plaque? Is that one of the things that you're doing at SENS?
That is one of the things we're doing, but not in relation to Alzheimer's. And the reason we're not is the same reason why we don't work on stem cell research, namely it's been done. And it really has been done well now. When I started thinking about this whole thing back nearly 20 years ago, that was at the point where the idea of vaccinating against amyloid in the brain for Alzheimer's had just begun, and there was an important proof of concept study published in 1999 showing that this could work in mice, in principle. It was very preliminary, of course, but it was enough of a proof of concept to get people excited. And from then on, over the next few years, there were clinical trials that started up really quickly. There were a few, bumps in the road over the next while. Some of the trials didn't succeed. But now we're in a position where I believe there are at least 4 separate immunotherapy protocols that have been all the way through phase 3 clinical trials and definitely shown to work to actually eliminate amyloid. Now, of course, Alzheimer's is a very complex, multifactorial disease. You can think of it really as aging in a microcosm. And the result is that the cognitive benefit that is actually enjoyed by the people who get their amyloid eliminated is pretty mild, if anything, because the other things that are going wrong in Alzheimer's at the same time have not yet been repaired. But still, it's a huge thing to have in our back pocket. So what we've done is we've worked on other amyloids. It's remarkable that very few people know how different types of protein get into this indigestible state in the spaces between cells in different tissues around the body, and they cause problems as well. And these are much, much less appreciated and understood. But we've worked on one that's particularly important for extremely old people over the age of 105 or so, and that happens in the heart. And we funded a group in Texas, in Houston, to develop an immunotherapy that eliminates that type of amyloid, and they were extremely successful. We published a nice proof of concept paper in 2014 in the Journal of Biological Chemistry, a very prominent journal. And that has duly been coming to the interest of investors, and so now there's a company being formed, and the professor who ran that work and also his number 2 researcher have quit their positions at the University of Texas in Houston in favor of going full-time with this company, and of course that's allowing them to attract investment. So yeah, things are going well.
So basically, you just sort of sum up this very complicated science. A lot of your work involves fixing damaged cells, too many cells, too few cells, mutations of cells, with these 7 methods that people can read about if they go to your website, sens.org, to extend the body's life. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And you, as I understand it, you believe that the technology exists now, that you think someone is alive today who could be able to live to 1,000. Is that right?
Well, let me put it slightly differently.
Okay.
The technology exists today that is close to allowing us to fix up most of the damage that the body accumulates. Sufficiently close, I believe, that we are likely to be able to fix most of that damage within the next 20 years. So first of all, I emphasize the word likely, not certain by any means, but I do think we have at least a 50-50 chance of getting to that point 20 years from now. Now, of course, I've already mentioned that some of these things are already in place or in clinical trials, some things indeed already proven, and a lot of the ones that are not in clinical trials yet will be so within the next couple of years. So that's pretty good news. But of course, clinical trials take time, some of them don't succeed, so I want to be cautious about the probabilities. I think there is a substantial chance that we will not get there in 20 years, so I need to emphasize that. Moreover, the thing that I think, the point that I think we will have reached in 20 years with high probability is not comprehensive 100% damage repair. It is only repair of most of the damage. So you may ask, well, how can I translate that into living to 1,000? And of course the answer is that when we repair damage, we buy time. We actually, rejuvenate people who are already in middle age or older, let's say 60 or 70 years old, so that there won't be biologically 60 or 70 again until let's say chronologically 90.
Okay.
So that's only 20 or 30 years that we've brought those people, but that's a long time in technology. And, of course, that means it's also a long time in medical research, which means that by the time these people do come back and they need to be re-rejuvenated, it's a racing certainty that we will actually have improved the therapies, still not to perfection, but sufficiently that we can kick the ball down the road a bit further and stay one step ahead of the problem. That's what I've called longevity escape velocity. And I think that is almost certain to be the case. Once we get those first 20 or 30 years of additional life conferred on people who are already in middle age at that time, then, game over.
And I also, I also looked at some of the... I'm sorry, Doctor, would you say something? What I learned from you also is we've already, I think, since 1900 increased the human lifespan by 30 years, and the population above 65 was something like 8.5% in 1950, and by 2050 in the U.S. it's supposed to be something like 22%. So we're already on our way to doing that, I would guess. Is that right?
Yes, we are, but one must be careful not to oversimplify that comparison. Because the fact is that the reason why we had this huge increase in average longevity over the past century was mostly because we pretty much entirely eliminated the causes of death that were killing a very large number of people very early in life. Specifically, certainly 200 years ago, more than 1/3 of babies, even in the wealthiest countries in the world, would die before the age of 1. And of course, there were a hell of a lot of deaths in childbirth and throughout life. So that means that the average longevity, was obviously going to rise a great deal once people stopped dying at those ages. However, once you've done that, once you've pretty much entirely eliminated early death, then you can't do it again. So you have to attack the next problem, which is, of course, now the ill health associated with old age. And the attacking of that is still very much in its infancy, of course. That's why we exist at Cancer Research Foundation. Now, of course, we have actually made progress if we look at, for example, the period since World War II, we still have made maybe 15 years of progress in increasing longevity in the developed world. And that is despite the fact that by the end of World War II, we had already pretty much entirely done the easy part, the elimination of deaths from infectious diseases early in life. So we have made some progress. But again, it's not the kind of progress that we would expect to see continuing unless and until we make completely dramatic breakthroughs in what kind of medicines we're applying here. The increases that have happened over the past 50 or 70 years have mainly been due to prosperity, due to people getting better nutrition, especially better nutrition early in life, that has allowed them to simply, spend their lives biologically younger than they would otherwise have done. It's not mainly been as a result of medicine.
All right. One thing I learned from your videos that I wasn't aware of before is a hydra. And a hydra basically in a laboratory can live essentially forever if there's no predator. Could you just explain what a hydra is and that if there's any relevance to that, to the work you're doing and this work?
Sure. Yeah, so hydra are a simple animal. They only have about 20 different types of cell, and they live in fresh water, and they are basically immortal. People have grown these things and kept them alive in fish tanks, in laboratories for many years, and they just don't die. And that's pretty interesting because they have a rapid life cycle. Your average hydra can give birth to another hydra after only a few days of life. But your second question, namely, what can we learn from hydra in terms of how to increase our own life, the answer is really not very much. And the reason it's not very much is because hydra do not have any non-dividing cells. All of these 20 cell types that I mentioned a moment ago, they constantly divide. Well, I mean, not constantly, but certainly in a hydra, however old the hydra is, there is no cell in the hydra that has actually, been sitting there without dividing for more than 3 weeks or so.
All right.
Which is not very long. And and the reason that's so important is because cell division is a fabulously powerful and versatile rejuvenating process, a process that dilution or by selection, reduces the amount of damage that each individual cell actually contains, right?
All right.
So we are, therefore, if we look at our own bodies, we don't have that luxury. There are very essential parts of the body, especially the brain, that are composed of cells that don't divide at all. And furthermore, the brain's function, it depends on the fact that it's composed of cells that don't divide at all. So we don't have that option.
Is there any animal that we can look to that gives us some, don't tortoises live something like 140 years? Is there anything that we can look to that gives us some model for what we could do for as a human or not that's alive today?
Different animals tell us different things. In general, though, not much. We can't get much from any of these animals. So, for example, tortoises and other lower vertebrates, they're not warm-blooded. So that means that they do a lot less breathing, a lot less, of the chemistry that combines oxygen with nutrients to extract energy from the nutrients. And that's very helpful to them because it means that they don't make so much in the way of toxic free radicals, these reactive molecules that are a kind of byproduct of breathing.
All right.
Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still there, yes.
Good. So again, you can't necessarily learn much from those. Then we could look at mammals that live a long time. In general, the mammals that live a really long time are really large. So, whales, for example. And that also means that they don't have to breathe so much. They don't have each individual cell in a whale doesn't have to do so much metabolizing of oxygen as an individual cell in a human being does because of just the surface to volume ratio. So again, they may not have any tricks that we don't have that allow them to live longer. They may just have an easier problem to solve.
Okay.
Now, there are a few cases where we may be able to learn something. One particularly prominent one right now in research is there's a very small rodent called the naked mole rat, which lives in underground tunnels in the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. And they also don't have too much to worry about in terms of breathing because they are in an environment which is very warm and where the temperature is very constant from day to night. So they are not as warm-blooded as your average mammal. But in addition to that, they do appear to have particularly strong ability to avoid cancer. And the mechanisms underlying that have only recently started to become elucidated. So we might learn something there. Similarly, birds and also bats, because they fly, they are very protected against predators. They can get away from predators a lot more easily than land-based mammals. And that means that has also allowed evolution to create new tricks and make them slower at aging. But again, using these tricks is tricky. You'd have to kind of, figure out ways to juxtapose these new methods that these other animals are using with the rest of human metabolism. You don't want to just turn humans into birds. You want to find some small tricks that you can do, and that's not necessarily easy.
Could you discuss the death trance culture, as you say, which basically I don't think the FDA recognizes this type of work officially. I think you said in one of your videos, and basically that so much opposition is put in front of you, like for saying, well, if we can live so long, then we'll just have overpopulation. And you say, well, we can just have less children, and there's no reason not to work on this. But it's just like it really goes against the grain, goes against really much of religious thought, which is basically that we're going to die and we try to live a good life so we can be rewarded in the afterlife. But a lot of what you're doing is, I guess maybe less so now, but there was a lot of resistance, correct? As death trance, as you say.
Okay, so you just said a bunch of things that are not quite correct. So let me go from the top. The first thing about the FDA, that's historically been true, that it wasn't possible to approve a drug for aging. But now it's not really true anymore. The word aging is kind of part of the problem because nobody really agrees on the definition of what it is. And of course, the FDA can't approve a clinical trial for something without being precise about what they're approving it for, right? So this problem was largely solved a couple of years ago by a very extended and detailed discussion that occurred between the FDA and a few senior gerontologists. And the result was they came up with a definition of aging in all but name. In other words, a way that a clinical trial could be designed with an endpoint that, for practical purposes, was equivalent to aging, but which was actually defined in a very complex, subtle, combinatorial way. And the result was there is now a clinical trial that's probably going to start fairly soon for a drug called metformin. Now, metformin is a very old drug, and no one's going to make any money from it, because it's been off patented before anyone, all of us were born. But still, the principle is now established. So anyone else, if they have another drug that they think might have a general effect on aging, they can go along and propose a clinical trial, and they can use the identical same endpoint that is in place for this trial, and the FDA will say, all right, go ahead. That is an enormously important thing for the for the enthusiasm of Big Pharma for actually developing such drugs. And actually, there's been another advance, very much more recently, just a few months ago, in which the World Health Organization implemented a way of incorporating aging into the classification, the taxonomy of disease and sickness that is used worldwide for identifying why a physician is prescribing this or that drug. And that's, again, going to make a huge difference to the enthusiasm of Big Pharma in developing such drugs. Now, if we go to the pro-aging trance, this is a very big deal. The pro-aging trance is the name that I gave for the spectacular irrationality that people exhibit when you talk to them about the idea of doing something about aging. And especially if you talk to them about the desirability of doing something about aging. They will come up with the most extraordinary excuses for aging, and arguments for why it's some kind of blessing in disguise. And that has got slightly better over the years, but it's still really, really bad. It's terrible. And the reason it's terrible is because the actual problems that people come up with have really simple answers to them, really simple rebuttals, and people just refuse to listen. I've been giving the same answers to these questions since forever, and it's just insane how people just, they don't come up with any reasons why my rebuttals are incorrect. They just don't hear them. They just don't listen, and they'll come back with the same reservations the following day. So the one you mentioned in particular regarding overpopulation, quite important actually to slightly correct what you said. I don't only say that people could have less kids. And the reason I don't only say that is because, people don't really fancy having fewer kids. People really like the idea of being able to have kids when they want to. Now, yes, it's true that given the choice between, on the one hand, having fewer kids than you would like, and on the other hand, getting seriously sick, with Alzheimer's and so on, and dying, most people might well choose to have fewer kids. But still, it's not a very persuasive argument because it's a dilemma. So the thing that I prefer these days is actually to emphasize that the overpopulation problem is already in the process of being solved by the advent of other technologies that will reduce the extent to which people pollute the planet. Of course, I'm talking about renewable energy, but also artificial meat, desalination on a big scale. These things are going to hugely reduce the extent to which humanity damages the environment, and therefore it's going to increase the carrying capacity of the planet. So we're going to be able to have a lot more people on the planet with less environmental impact than what we have today.
All right.
Now, one thing I wanted to correct in what you said a moment ago was with regard to religion. People do often assume that religious people would be particularly opposed to this because it would be seen as, altering God's will and all that kind of stuff. But
your experiences as an artist and a business person, or just you have two awesome females on the mic. Please. Call in. So the phone number to call in is 646-690-2976. We're gonna launch into your first song, so I'll let you intro it. Tell me what song we're about to play.
We're gonna play Alone.
Mm-hmm.
It's a song that I play on my ukulele, and it's just about being burnt out from your day-to-day kind of life living situation. So that's that. I hope you like it.
Shout out to Ursa Major, who texted while we were jamming out to the song. Thanks. To let us know that it's also his jam.
Thanks. Oh, Ursa. I was going to call you by your name.
No, call him by his name. It's fine. I'm just so used to separating everything in my brain.
Right,
that,
the music and the real name.
It's a weird habit of mine.
No, it's fine. It's not weird at all.
So, you know, this is one fear conquered. That's going on.
Yeah.
What's the next fear? Because it was a lot that you had to kind of conquer. Because I saw your photo shoot.
Yeah.
I saw a lot.
Yeah, putting yourself like in a situation where you're like the subject of art or music, and that's really awkward for me because I like to kind of fall back and be like the person singing in the back, and like I don't know, it's very scary to stand in front of people and just share something you made, especially when you wrote it, because it's you. It's not like I'm also a visual artist. It's not like a drawing that I drew that somebody doesn't like it. It's like, oh, okay, I can get better. It's literally like you and your words, and like it's terrifying.
No, I definitely know that. I used to, for people who listen to this, I've mentioned many times that once upon a time I was an actor. And I definitely had that experience where, like, if you didn't like it, it wasn't me. Yeah. It was the character you had issues with. But then if you're singing or something, then you're like, oh, no, that was me.
Like, that's definitely me.
That's all of me.
I'm sorry if you don't like it, but I'm not sorry.
Yeah, exactly. But, yeah. So